My father spent 30 years working on other people's cars. He could rebuild an engine from scratch. He could diagnose a problem by sound alone. He knew every make, every model, every year. Cars were his whole identity, his whole world, and he never once let me touch one. Not because I wasn't interested. I was obsessed with cars, the way they worked, the way they moved, the systems underneath, all that metal and speed. I asked him once at 16 to teach me to drive. Just asked. Politely. At the dinner table, he looked at me like I'd said something embarrassing. Girls don't need to know how to drive. Find a man who will drive you. My mother stared at her plate. My brother Mitchell laughed, and Raymond Callahan went back to his food like the conversation was over. It was over for him. It was just starting for me. Fast forward 13 years. November, Indianapolis. A gray Tuesday morning with cold rain coming sideways off the interstate. I'm in a white Mercedes-Benz C-Class heading to City Hall, where I'm about to present Phase 2 of the Indianapolis Transit expansion to the City Council. And there he is, at the bus stop, in the rain, waiting for Route 12, the route I designed. I'm Petra. This is my story, and if you've ever been told you couldn't by someone who should have been the first one to believe you could then stay, like and subscribe only if this already hits different, because we're just getting started. Let me tell you about the Callahan House on Delphi Avenue, Indianapolis. 3 bedrooms, 1.5 bathrooms, a driveway that was always occupied by at least 2 cars in various states of being taken apart and put back together. The garage, the one attached to our house, not the one Raymond worked at, was his. Not ours. His. There was an unspoken rule that the rest of us did not cross that threshold without being invited. In 16 years of living in that house, I was invited exactly twice. Raymond Callahan was not a loud man. That's the thing people misunderstand about fathers like him. They picture someone who screams, who throws things, who makes the whole house shake. Raymond was not that. He was quiet, controlled. He moved through our home like a man who had decided a long time ago exactly how things would be and simply never revisited that decision. He was the kind of man who corrected the waiter at restaurants but left a 15% tip anyway, just so no one could call him cheap. The kind of man who read the newspaper every morning at the kitchen table and did not like to be spoken to until he had finished. The kind of man who believed deeply and without question that there was a correct order to the world, and that order had men at the top and women somewhere further down, useful in specific ways, decorative in others. He was also genuinely one of the best mechanics in Indianapolis. I don't say that to be generous. I say it because it matters to the story. Raymond knew engines the way some people know music, intuitively, completely, in a way that went past knowledge into something closer to instinct. Hendrick's Auto on Industrial Park Drive had been his workplace since before I was born. Customers drove in from 3 counties away to have him look at their cars. His boss, a heavyset man named Dale Hendricks, used to say that Raymond could diagnose an engine problem by sound alone, standing 20 feet away in the parking lot. Cars were Raymond's language, his identity, the thing he was proudest of in the world, and he shared none of it with me. Mitchell was a different story. My brother is 3 years older than me. Same dark hair, same jaw. But where I was quiet and watchful, Mitchell was loud and comfortable, the kind of person who fills a room without meaning to. Raymond loved that about him. From the time Mitchell was 12 years old, he was out in that garage every Saturday morning, handing Dad tools, learning the names of parts sitting in the driver's seat of whatever project car Raymond was working on that season. I used to watch from the kitchen window. I remember one Saturday in particular. I was 11. Mitchell was 14. Raymond was showing him how to check the oil on a 1994 Mustang. He was restoring a cherry red fastback that he kept covered with a tarp the rest of the week, like it was something sacred. He could see them through the glass, Raymond's hand on Mitchell's shoulder pointing at the engine, saying something that made Mitchell laugh. I dried the breakfast dishes and watched and said nothing. That was the Saturday I understood, without anyone having to explain it, that the garage was not for me. I tested that understanding 4 years later. I was 15, almost 16. A girl in my class named Priya had just gotten her learner's permit, and she would not stop talking about it. How her dad had taken her out to the parking lot of the community center 3 Sundays in a row. How she'd parallel parked on the first try. How free it felt, she said, just her and the road and the ability to go wherever she decided. I wanted that. I wanted it badly enough that I convinced myself to ask. Dinner, a Wednesday in March. Sandra had made pot roast. Raymond was in a decent mood. One of his regular customers had brought in a BMW that 3 other shops had given up on, and Raymond had fixed it in 4 hours. He was telling Mitchell about it. I waited for a pause. "Dad," I said, "I was thinking, could you teach me to drive this summer before school starts?" The table went quiet in that particular way that means everyone already knows the answer. Raymond looked at me. Not unkindly, that's what I remember. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even dismissive in a dramatic way. He just looked at me with the calm, patient expression of a man explaining something obvious to someone who should already know it. Girls don't need to know how to drive Petra. Your job is to find a man who will drive you. Sandra stared at her plate. Mitchell made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh, but wasn't quite not one either. I opened my mouth, closed it. I looked at my mother, that instinctive thing you do when you're young and you need someone to step in. Sandra picked up her fork and said quietly, "Your father knows best, honey." That was it. That was the whole conversation. I went back to my pot roast. I did not cry. I was 15 years old, and I had already learned by that point that crying at the dinner table only made things worse. So I chewed and swallowed and looked at the window above the sink and told myself it didn't matter. I almost believed it. What Raymond did not tell me that night, what he never told me because it never occurred to him that it was relevant, was that the following Saturday he spent 4 hours in the garage teaching Mitchell how to parallel park in the driveway using orange traffic cones he'd borrowed from work. I found out because I heard them laughing from my bedroom window. Mitchell got his license 3 months later. Raymond took the afternoon off work to take him to the DMV. They came home with a pizza and ate it in the garage hood up on the Mustang Mitchell sitting on the front bumper with his new license in his hand like it was a trophy. I had homework. I stayed in my room. I want to be precise about something because I think it matters. Raymond never called me stupid. He never said I was worthless or that my dreams were ridiculous or that he was ashamed of me. What he did was quieter and in some ways harder to name. He simply arranged the world so that certain things were available to Mitchell and not to me, and then acted as if that arrangement was natural, inevitable, not even worth discussing. That is a specific kind of damage, the kind that doesn't leave marks you can point to, the kind that makes you spend years wondering if you imagined it. I didn't imagine it, but I didn't know that yet. I was 15 years old, and I had a lot left to learn about cars, about roads, about what I was capable of, and about the fact that the woman who would teach me most of it. The summer I turned 16, I got a job. Not because I wanted spending money, not because my friends were doing it, because I had done the math and understood with the cold clarity of a teenager who has been paying attention that if I wanted to go anywhere in this life, literally and figuratively, I was going to have to get there myself. I started working in a sandwich shop 3 miles from our house on Kessler Boulevard, 4 afternoons a week and all day Saturday. The owner, a tired but decent woman named Carol, paid me $9.50 an hour and let me eat whatever was left at the end of my shift. I took the bus there and the bus home, 45 minutes each way. I didn't complain about it. I just sat by the window and watched the roads and counted the stops and learned without meaning to exactly how the city moved. That was the year I also discovered that I was very, very good at math. Not good the way teachers say when they mean you're adequate. Good the way that made my AP calculus teacher, a thin, precise man named Mr. Aldridge, stop in the middle of class one afternoon and say in front of everyone, "Petra, where did you learn to think like that?" I didn't have an answer. I just told him I liked the way numbers fit together. He looked at me for a moment like he was recalibrating something, and then he moved on with the lesson. After class, he stopped me at the door. "Have you thought about what you want to study?" he asked. I hadn't, not seriously. Raymond's voice had a way of filling up that particular space in my head, the space where ambition was supposed to live, with a low, steady noise that sounded like reason but was actually just limitation wearing a suit. "Not really," I said. Mr. Aldridge handed me a brochure for a summer engineering program at Purdue. "Think about it," he said. I folded it into my jacket pocket. I thought about it on the bus home. I thought about it while I made dinner because Sandra was working a late shift and Raymond never cooked. I thought about it while Mitchell sat at the kitchen table eating the food I had made and scrolling through his phone without saying thank you. I did not show the brochure to Raymond. I already knew what he would say. The incident that I return to, most often the one that sits in my chest like a stone, even now, 13 years later, happened the following spring, April, junior year. I had applied without telling anyone in my family to the Indiana Junior Engineering Scholarship. It was a statewide competition. You submitted a project proposal, a personal essay, and your academic record. 40 students were selected. Each received $5,000 toward a college engineering program and an invitation to a summer intensive at Indiana University. I worked on my application for 6 weeks. Every evening, after my shift at the sandwich shop, I sat at my desk with the door closed and wrote and rewrote and calculated and revised. My project proposal was about traffic flow optimization at high congestion urban intersections. I had picked the intersection of Kessler and College Avenue because I passed through it twice a day on the bus and had started, without quite meaning, to keeping informal data on delay patterns in a notebook. I submitted the application on a Tuesday night in February, alone in my room, while Raymond watched television downstairs and Mitchell borrowed the family car without asking. 8 weeks later, a letter arrived. I got home from school before anyone else that day. The letter was in the mailbox between a cable bill and a furniture catalog. I stood in the driveway and opened it. I had been selected, one of 40 students in the state of Indiana. I read the letter 3 times on the driveway. Then I went inside, sat down at the kitchen table, and waited. Sandra came home first. I showed her the letter. She read. It smiled the careful smile she used when she wasn't sure how Raymond would react to something, and said, "That's wonderful, honey. We'll tell your father at dinner." Raymond came home at 6:15. He washed his hands at the kitchen sink. He always washed his hands at the kitchen sink before dinner, a habit so ingrained it had become almost ceremonial, and sat down. Sandra put the letter beside his plate without saying anything. He picked it up, read it, set it back down, picked up his fork. "Engineering," he said, not a question, a verdict. "It's a scholarship," I said. $5,000. "For what school?" "Indiana University for the summer program, then any accredited engineering program for college." He cut his pot roast, chewed, swallowed. "That's a man's field, Petra." The table went quiet. Sandra looked at her glass of water. Mitchell looked at his phone under the table, which he was not supposed to have at dinner. "The letter says I was one of 40 selected from the whole state," I said. My voice was steady. I was proud of that. "I'm sure you were." Raymond said it without looking up. "Doesn't change what the field is." "Raymond," Sandra said softly. One word. She didn't finish the sentence. "I'm being realistic," he said. "She'll get there, find out it's all men, and quit. Better to know now." I looked at my father across that dinner table at the top of his head, bent over his plate, already done with the conversation, and I felt something happen inside me. Not anger, not yet. Something quieter. A decision being made in a place I didn't have words for yet. I picked up my fork. I ate my dinner. I did not argue. 2 weeks later, Mitchell came home and announced that he had been accepted to the auto mechanics program at Ivy Tech Community College. He had not applied to anything else. He had not told anyone he was applying. His GPA was 2.3. Raymond stood up from his chair. He actually stood up. He crossed the kitchen and put both hands on Mitchell's shoulders and said, "That's my son. That's exactly right." Sandra clapped her hands together, once delighted. Someone called Grandma Callahan. There was talk of going out to dinner to celebrate. No one mentioned my scholarship. Not that night. Not the next day. Not ever, as far as I can remember. I sat at the table and watched my family celebrate my brother's acceptance to a 2-year community college program with a 2.3 GPA, and I thought about the letter sitting on my desk upstairs, one of 40 in the state, and I made myself a promise, quietly, the way I did everything in that house. I promised myself that one day I would be so undeniably successful that Raymond Callahan would have no framework left to dismiss me with, that I would build something so visible, so concrete, so impossible to ignore, that even a man who had spent his whole life deciding what women were and weren't capable of would have to stop and look. I didn't know then what that thing would be, but I knew I was going to find it. That summer, I started the Junior Engineering Intensive at Indiana University. I took the bus to Bloomington alone on a Sunday morning in June with one bag and the $5,000 scholarship check folded in my wallet. Raymond did not come to see me off. He had a car show that weekend. A 1967 Chevrolet Camaro he had been restoring for 8 months was finally ready to show. He left Saturday morning with the trailer hitched to his truck, Mitchell riding shotgun, and did not look back at the house. I watched them pull out of the driveway from my bedroom window. Then I went downstairs, made myself a cup of coffee, and started packing. I didn't know it yet, but that was the last morning I would ever spend waiting for Raymond Callahan to notice me. Aunt Josephine was my mother's older sister by 7 years. She never married. She never apologized for it. In the Callahan household, or rather in Raymond's version of the world that made her a cautionary tale, a woman who had made wrong choices and ended up alone. He never said it in those words. He didn't have to. It lived in the way he addressed her at family gatherings, in the slight pause before he said her name, in the way he would look at Sandra after Josephine said something confident and self-assured, as if to say, "See what happens to women," like that Josephine had spent 26 years working for the Indianapolis Department of Public Works. She started as a junior civil engineer straight out of Purdue. In the early 1980s, one of 3 women in her graduating class, and retired as Deputy Director of Infrastructure Planning. She had overseen the redesign of the I-65 interchange, the expansion of the White River pedestrian corridor, and roughly 40% of the city's current drainage grid. Raymond called her your aunt who thinks she knows everything. She called him Sandra's husband. She called me on the Sunday evening after I returned from my first week at the Indiana University Summer Intensive and asked how it went. I told her all of it. The projects, the professors, the other students, kids from Carmel and Fort Wayne and South Bend who talked about engineering the way Mitchell talked about cars, with that easy, inherited confidence that came from having been told their whole lives that this was for them. I told her how I felt sitting in those rooms, like I belonged, like something had been unlocked. There was a pause on the line. "Good," Josephine said, "just that. Hold on to that feeling. Write it down if you have to, because people are going to spend the next several years trying to talk you out of it." "Dad already has," I said. Another pause. Longer this time. "I know," she said. "I've been watching your father manage you for 16 years, Petra. I want you to understand something. What he's doing, it's not about you. It's about him. Men like Raymond are only comfortable in a world they understand. And you are becoming something he doesn't understand. That frightens him. So he calls it impractical. He calls it a man's field. He calls it unrealistic." She paused. "None of those are the real word." "What's the real word?" I asked. "Threatening," she said. I sat with that for a long time after we hung up. Junior year became senior year. I applied to 6 universities. I told Sandra. I did not tell Raymond. I was accepted to Purdue University's School of Civil Engineering with a partial merit scholarship. I was accepted to Ohio State. I was accepted to the University of Michigan. 3 other schools said yes as well. Purdue was my first choice. It was where Josephine had gone. It was one of the top civil engineering programs in the country. The partial scholarship, combined with the junior engineering award money I had saved, covered roughly 60% of the first year's costs. I had been working at the sandwich shop for 2 years. I had saved $4,200. I had a plan. I told Raymond at dinner on a Thursday in March. I had thought carefully about how to do it. Not asking for permission. I was done asking Raymond for permission. Just informing him. Factually. The way you'd read a weather report. "I've been accepted to Purdue," I said. "Engineering program. I'm going in the fall." Raymond looked up from his plate. "Who's paying for it?" he said. "Scholarship, my savings, and student loans for the rest." Student loans. He said it like I'd suggested something mildly criminal. "Yes. That's a lot of debt for a degree you won't use." "I'll use it." He looked at me for a moment, then he looked at Sandra, then he went back to his food. "Mitchell got into Ivy Tech," he said, to no one in particular. "No loans, 2-year program, solid trade, guaranteed work at the end of it." "I know," I said, "just saying." "I know what you're saying, Dad." The conversation ended there. No congratulations. No questions about Purdue, about the program, about what I wanted to do with the degree, nothing. Sandra touched my hand briefly under the table, that small private gesture she used when she wanted me to know she had heard me without being willing to say so out loud. It was the best she could do. I had stopped expecting more. What happened 2 weeks before I left for Purdue is the part of this story that I have turned over in my mind more times than I can count. Mitchell, who had started at Ivy Tech in September, had dropped out by November. He hadn't told anyone for 4 months. He'd been leaving the house every morning at the same time, coming home at the same time, and spending the hours in between doing what exactly I was never entirely clear on. When it finally came out when Ivy Tech sent a letter to the house that Raymond opened by mistake, there was a dinner that I was not present for, a conversation I heard only in fragments through the ceiling of my bedroom. What I heard Raymond's voice, low and steady, not angry. Mitchell's voice defensive, then quieter. Sandra saying something soft and placating, then silence. Then about 20 minutes later, the sound of the television going on in the living room. The next morning, Raymond announced that he was going to help Mitchell get a position at Hendricks Auto. Dale Hendricks owed him a favor. Mitchell could start as a lot attendant and work his way up. It would be fine. It was all going to be fine. Mitchell started at Hendricks Auto the following Monday. 2 weeks later, I left for Purdue. Raymond did not help me carry my boxes to Sandra's car. He was in the garage. I walked past the open garage door on my way to the driveway, both arms full, and he looked up from the engine he was working on. We looked at each other for a moment. "Drive safe," he said. Those were the words, drive safe. To the daughter he had never taught to drive, said without irony, without awareness. Just 2 words tossed across the driveway on a Saturday morning in August, and then he looked back down at the engine. I put my boxes in Sandra's trunk. She drove me to the bus station because I had told her I'd rather take the bus than have Raymond drop me off and spend the whole ride in silence. She cried a little at the curb. I hugged her for a long time. I meant it. Sandra was not a strong woman, but she loved me in the ways she was capable of, and I had made my peace with the limits of that. On the bus to West Lafayette, I called Aunt Josephine. "I'm on my way," I told her. "I know you are," she said. "Listen, when you get settled, call me. I want to take you somewhere." "Where?" "An empty parking lot." "Oh, Comer," she said. "It's time you learned to drive." I laughed for the first time in what felt like weeks. Real laughter, the kind that comes from somewhere deep and surprised. "Josephine," I said. "He's going to lose his mind." "He doesn't have to know," she said simply. "That's rather the point." I leaned my head against the bus window and watched Indianapolis shrink behind me, the overpasses, the on-ramps, the grid of roads spreading out in every direction like a diagram of somewhere I was finally leaving. I didn't know it then. But I was also driving toward it, toward all of it. I just didn't have the keys yet. Purdue changed me in ways I am still discovering. Not because it was easy. It wasn't. The School of Civil Engineering at Purdue is not a place that makes allowances for doubt. First semester, I failed my second midterm in structural analysis and sat in the stairwell outside the exam room for 20 minutes before I could make myself stand up. I called Josephine that night from my dorm room with the lights off, lying on my back, staring at the ceiling, and told her I wasn't sure I was smart enough for this. She was quiet for a moment. "Did you fail because you don't understand the material?" she asked. "No," I said. "I understand it." I panicked. "Then you're smart enough," she said. "You just need to learn to trust what you know. That takes longer for us than it does for them. It shouldn't, But it does. Keep going, Anais Neve. I kept going. By the end of sophomore year, I had a 3.8 GPA. By junior year, I was tying the Introduction to Transportation Systems course I had taken as a freshman. My thesis advisor, a precise and demanding professor named Dr. Elaine Burrows, told me in our first meeting that my traffic flow analysis had a quality she rarely saw in undergraduates, what she called structural intuition. The ability to look at a system and understand not just how it worked, but why it was failing. I thought about Raymond when she said that, about all those years watching him work on engines through the kitchen window, about how much I had absorbed without being allowed inside the room. I graduated in May with honors, civil engineering concentration in transportation systems. Josephine drove up from Indianapolis for the ceremony. She sat in the third row in a yellow blazer and clapped so hard that the woman next to her turned and stared. Sandra came too. She cried through the entire processional. Raymond did not come. He sent a text message the following evening. I still have it. I have never deleted it, not because it was kind, but because I want to remember exactly what it was. It said, "Heard you graduated. Good luck out there." That was it. 11 words, no punctuation after graduated. No period at the end. I read it twice, set my phone face down on the desk, and then I opened my laptop and accepted the job offer from Meridian Infrastructure Group in Charlotte, North Carolina. Charlotte was the first place in my life that felt entirely mine. I arrived in July with 2 suitcases and a car I had bought 3 weeks earlier, a used 2017 Honda Civic with 112,000 miles on it, silver with a small crack in the passenger side mirror that I kept meaning to fix and never did. I had taught myself to drive in the parking lots of 3 different shopping centers in West Lafayette over the course of 2 years, with Josephine coaching me over the phone, and when she visited twice a year, sitting in the passenger seat with the calm, unhurried patience of someone who has spent her career building things meant to last. The day I passed my Indiana driver's test, I called her before I called anyone else. "I passed," I said. "Of course you did," she said. I did not call Raymond. Meridian Infrastructure Group specialized in urban transit consulting, exactly the intersection of civil engineering and systems design that I had been building toward since that notebook full of traffic delay data I kept as a 16-year-old on the bus down Kessler Boulevard. My first project was a bus rapid transit feasibility study for the city of Gastonia, a mid-sized city 30 miles west of Charlotte. I spent 4 months on it. My section chief, a tall, methodical man named Bernardo Coffer, reviewed my final report and told me it was the most thorough first project submission he had seen in 11 years of running his team. I worked hard. I work the way people work when they have something to prove. Not to anyone else exactly, but to some version of themselves that still flinches when they hear a specific tone in a voice from a specific direction. I stopped flinching slowly. It took about a year. By my second year in Charlotte, I had been promoted to project lead on a streetcar corridor analysis for the South End neighborhood. By my third year, I was managing a team of 6. I bought a 1-bedroom apartment in Plaza Midwood, furnished it slowly and deliberately, and discovered that I was genuinely, quietly happy in a way I had not been before. The happiness that comes not from excitement, but from alignment, from a life that fits the shape of who you actually are. I called Sandra every 2 weeks. She told me about the house, about her shifts at the retail job she had held for 9 years, about Mitchell's various employment situations, a detail that always arrived, wrapped in careful diplomatic language that I had learned to translate. Mitchell is figuring things out meant he had quit or been let go. Mitchell is taking some time meant Raymond was covering his rent again. I listened. I did not comment. It was not my life anymore. Raymond and I did not speak for 14 months after my graduation text. Then he called on a Sunday in November. I was making coffee still in my pajamas, rain against the Charlotte windows, and I answered because I was in a good enough place finally to be curious rather than afraid. He asked how the job was going. I told him, briefly. Factually, he said, Charlotte was supposed to have good weather. I agreed. He said Mitchell had started a new job doing detailing work at a car dealership on the north side of Indianapolis. I said that was good. There was a pause, long enough that I checked the screen to make sure the call hadn't dropped. You always were the stubborn one, he said. Not unkindly, almost like a compliment. I didn't know what to do with that, so I said nothing. We hung up 6 minutes after we had started. I stood in my kitchen and drank my coffee and looked out the window at the rain and tried to decide how I felt. I couldn't quite. It was one of those conversations that doesn't fit into any of the categories you've prepared for. I called Josephine. He called, I said. I know, she said. He called me first. He didn't know what to say to you, so he practiced on me. I stared at my coffee cup. What did he say to you? He said he thought you were doing well. A pause. He said he didn't expect that. There it was, dressed up in a phone call, wrapped in small talk about weather and Mitchell's new job. That was what he had called to say. He didn't expect that. 13 years of that sentence condensed into a Sunday morning call that lasted 6 minutes and ended without an apology. I told myself it was enough, that at least he had called, that at least the word well had been used. It wasn't enough. I knew it wasn't enough. But I was 26 years old, and I had learned by then to hold two things at once, the truth of what I deserved and the reality of what I was going to get. What I didn't know yet was that the call was not an ending. It was in a way I couldn't have predicted a beginning. 3 weeks later, Josephine called me on a Tuesday morning while I was at my desk at Meridian. Are you sitting down? She asked. I'm at work, I said. I know. Are you sitting down? I sat down. The city of Indianapolis has issued an RFP, she said. Request for proposal, full transit system redesign, new depot, new routes, signal infrastructure overhaul. The biggest public works project this city has seen since the interstate was built. She paused. Meridian is on the short list. I put in a word with someone on the selection committee. Your name came up. The office sounds around me, keyboards, a distant phone. Someone laughing in the break room seemed to go very quiet. Josephine, I said carefully. The project area, do you know what neighborhoods it covers? I do, she said. That's why I'm calling you first. She read me the list of streets, the corridors, the parcels slated for acquisition and development. I wrote them down on the notepad beside my keyboard, one by one. When she got to Industrial Park Drive, I stopped writing. I knew that address. I had known it since I was 6 years old, riding in the back of Raymond's truck on Saturday mornings, watching the garage roll into view from the window Hendrick's Auto, the red and white sign, the chain link fence, the row of cars waiting in the lot like patients in a waiting room. 456 Industrial Park Drive. I stared at what I had written. Petra, Josephine said. I'm here's I said. Do you want the project? Outside my Charlotte window, the November rain had stopped. A weak, pale sun was coming through the clouds. On my notepad, 456 Industrial Park Drive sat at the bottom of a list that was about to change everything. Meridian won the contract in February. I found out on a Thursday afternoon sitting in Bernard's office with the door closed and the blinds half drawn against the winter light coming off the Charlotte skyline. He slid the letter across the desk without saying anything. I read it once. Then I looked up. "You're leading it," Bernard said. "Indianapolis transit expansion, full project start to finish, site visits, stakeholder presentations, final design approval, all of it." I had prepared for this moment. I had told myself during the 3 months between Josephine's call and the contract decision that I would receive the news calmly, professionally, that I would nod and say thank you and save whatever I was feeling for later in private, the way I had trained myself to do with every significant thing in my life. Instead, I sat in Bernard's office and felt something move through me like a current, not triumph, not yet something quieter and more complicated. The feeling of a door opening that you have been standing in front of for a very long time. "Thank you," I said. My voice was steady. Bernard looked at me over his reading glasses. "You've been ready for this since you walked in here 3 years ago," he said. "I just needed a project that was ready for you." I drove home that evening on the I-77 with both hands on the wheel and the radio off. I thought about a 16-year-old girl on a bus down Kessler Boulevard with a notebook full of traffic delay data. I thought about a stairwell outside an exam room at Purdue. I thought about 11 words with no period at the end. Then I thought about 456 Industrial Park Drive, and I thought I have a decision to make. I want to be honest about what happened next, because I think people will assume the choice was easy. That I sat down at my desk, looked at the acquisition list, and felt some clean, satisfying sense of justice descend on me like a verdict. It wasn't like that. For 6 days after we won the contract, I did not look at the parcel files for Industrial Park Drive. I worked on other sections of the project, the route redesign for the Broad Ripple corridor, the signal timing analysis for the downtown grid, the environmental impact assessment for the depot site. I was thorough and focused and professional, and every evening when I got home, I made dinner and called Josephine, and did not mention the one thing that was sitting in the middle of every conversation, like a piece of furniture neither of us wanted to walk around. On the 7th day, a Sunday, Raymond called. He had heard about the project. Not from me, from Dale Hendricks, his boss at the garage, who had received a formal notice from the city about the acquisition process. The letter had arrived on Friday. By Sunday morning, Raymond knew he did not know I was involved. He did not know Meridian was the firm. He did not know that the engineer who had signed the preliminary site assessment for 456 Industrial Park Drive had grown up 3 miles away and used to watch him work through a kitchen window. He called because he was frightened. I could hear it not in the words, but underneath them, in the particular tightness of his voice that I recognized from childhood as the sound Raymond Callahan made when something was happening that he could not fix with his hands. "They're going to tear down Hendricks," he said. "Some transit project. City's buying the whole block." "I heard about that project," I said carefully. "Dale's fighting it. Lawyer says there might be grounds for a challenge. 22 years I've worked there, Petra. 22 years. "I know," I said. "These people, these planners, these engineers, sitting in their offices, drawing lines on maps, they don't think about what it does to real people, to businesses that have been there for decades, to the people who work there." His voice had found its familiar register, now the one he used when he was explaining something obvious to someone who should already know it. "That's the problem with putting people in charge of things they don't understand. They optimize for numbers. They don't see the human cost." I held the phone against my ear and looked out my Charlotte window at the Sunday morning sky. He didn't know. He was calling his daughter the girl he never taught to drive the girl. whose scholarship he couldn't be bothered to acknowledge the girl he had dismissed at dinner tables and over pot roast and in driveways for the better part of 2 decades, to complain about engineers who didn't understand real people. He didn't know he was talking to the engineer. I made a decision in that moment. Yeah, not about the project. That decision was already made, had been made by the math and the planning logic and the city council and the environmental assessments, none of which had anything to do with Raymond Callahan. The depot needed to go on Industrial Park Drive because Industrial Park Drive was the correct location. That was simply true. The decision I made was about something else. I decided not to tell him. Not yet. "I'm sorry about the garage, Dad," I said, and I meant it in the specific and limited way that it was true. I was sorry for the disruption, for the uncertainty, for the 22 years of a working life suddenly displaced. Those things were real and they mattered. What I was not sorry for was the depot, or the routes, or the work. "Figure something out," he said. Not to me, to himself almost, the way he used to say it at the dinner table when a problem presented itself that he hadn't solved yet. "Always do." We hung up shortly after. I sat with my phone in my hand for a long moment. Then I opened my laptop, pulled up the Indianapolis Transit Expansion Project files, and spent the next 4 hours reviewing the Industrial Park Drive acquisition timeline. The parcel transfer was scheduled for the following October. Construction on the depot would begin the following spring. The new Route 12, redesigned from a single inefficient corridor into a branching network serving the north side, the medical district, and the south side neighborhoods that had been chronically underserved for 30 years, would begin test operations 14 months after groundbreaking. It was good work. It was the best work I had ever done. I knew that with the same certainty I had felt in Dr. Burroughs' office at Purdue when she told me I had structural intuition, the bone-deep recognition of something true. I was not going to compromise it. Not for Dale Hendricks, not for the lawyer Dale Hendricks had hired, and not for Raymond Callahan. What happened over the following 8 months I can only describe as the strange experience of living 2 parallel lives. In one life, I was lead engineer on the largest transit project in Indianapolis in a generation. I flew in for site visits every 6 weeks. I presented to the city council twice. I managed a team of 9 engineers and 4 project coordinators. I stood at the corner of Meridian and 38th at 7 in the morning with a site map and a thermos of coffee and looked at the city the way Josephine had taught me to look at it not as a place you live in, but as a system you are responsible for. In the other life, I was still Raymond Callahan's daughter. I still answered his calls when he made them, which was infrequently and usually when something had gone wrong. I still listened to updates about Mitchell, who had left the car dealership by April and was, according to Sandra, exploring options. I still sent my mother a card on her birthday and called her on Sunday evenings when I remembered. Raymond complained about the transit project 3 more times over those 8 months. Each time I listened, each time I said something neutral and true, each time I did not tell him. The 3rd time in September, 1 month before the parcel transfer, he said something that I have thought about every day since. He had been talking about the project again, about Dale's legal challenge, which had failed, about the timeline, which was firm, about the engineers, the planners, the faceless bureaucratic machinery grinding toward his garage. Then he stopped. A pause. "You know," he said almost to himself, "I always figured you'd end up doing something like nursing or teaching, something that suited you." Something that suited you. I was 28 years old. I was the lead engineer on a $47 million public infrastructure project. I had a team of 9 people. I had presented to a city council I had redesigned a transit network that would move 120,000 people a day more efficiently through the city where I grew up, something that suited you. I looked at the project files open on my screen, the depot plans, the route maps, the acquisition schedule with 456 Industrial Park Drive highlighted in yellow. I thought about a kitchen window, a cherry red Mustang under a tarp, a dining table, and a pot roast, and 11 words with no period. Yeah, I said quietly. I think I found something that suits me. He didn't hear it. The irony, the weight of it, everything it contained, he heard none of it. He moved on to something else, and we finished the call, and I sat at my desk in Charlotte and felt something shift inside me. Not anger, I was past anger, something cooler, something final. The groundbreaking ceremony was scheduled for the 3rd Saturday of November. I booked my flight to Indianapolis that night, and then I ordered the car. The Mercedes arrived on a Tuesday. White, C-Class, leather interior, the color of cream. I had ordered it 6 weeks earlier after I booked my flight to Indianapolis, after I sat at my desk in Charlotte and felt that final cooling shift inside me. I had saved for it for 2 years, not obsessively, not as some elaborate plan, but with the quiet intention of the person who knows what she wants and is willing to wait for it. I drove it off the lot on a Tuesday afternoon and sat in the parking lot for a few minutes with the engine running. I thought about a bus. The number 19, Kessler Boulevard, 45 minutes each way twice a day, 3 years of sandwich shop shifts. The way the seats felt in winter, cold vinyl, the smell of wet coats. The way I used to watch the roads from the window and count the stops. Then I put it in drive and went home. The 14 months between winning the Indianapolis contract and the groundbreaking ceremony were the most demanding of my professional life. I want to be honest about that. The project was not a vehicle for personal satisfaction. It was 400 pages of engineering specifications, 47 stakeholder meetings, 6 rounds of city council review, and more site visits than I can accurately count. It was also simply and completely the best work I had ever done. The Route 12 redesign alone took 4 months. 4? The original route was a single corridor north to south Broad Ripple to Garfield Park, with gaps in coverage that left entire neighborhoods functionally unserved. We rebuilt it as a branching network. 3 sub-routes feeding into a central spine. New signal priority infrastructure at 14 key intersections. Real-time tracking integration. Shelters with heating elements at the 12 highest use stops. One of those stops was on the corner of Meridian and 38th. I stood at that corner on a site visit in March, clipboard in hand, and looked at the bare concrete pad where the old shelter had been. A city planner named Kevin stood next to me, pointing at something on his tablet. I was not listening to Kevin. I was looking at the corner and thinking about a man in a wet jacket with his hands in his pockets, and I was thinking about Route 12, and I was thinking about how the world has a way of arranging itself sometimes with a precision that no engineer could have designed. Petra, Kevin said. Sorry, I said. What were you saying about the shelter dimensions? The depot broke ground in April. I was there. Steel-toed boots, hard hat, a shovel ceremony with the mayor and 4 city council members, and a photographer from the Indianapolis Star. The building that had stood on that land for 31 years, Hendricks Auto, red and white, sign, chain link fence, the row of cars in the lot had been cleared the previous October. What remained was a flat prepared site and the smell of turned earth and the particular silence of a place that is between what it was and what it is going to be. Dale Hendricks had retired. Raymond had found work at a smaller garage on the east side, 20 minutes further from the house, lower pay. He had mentioned it once in a phone call briefly in the tone he used for things he had decided not to be defeated by. I had said I was glad he found something. He had said it was fine. Mitchell, as of April, was between jobs again. Sandra did not use those words. She said he was taking a breath. I said that was fine, too. I was in Indianapolis 4 times between April and November. Each time I stayed at a hotel on the north side near the project site and did not tell Raymond I was in the Citadel. Not out of cruelty, I simply had no obligation to announce myself, and I had learned by then that the version of me that existed in that house on Delphi Avenue was a smaller, older version that I had no interest in inhabiting even temporarily. Josephine came to dinner with me each time. We ate at a Thai place she liked on Broad Ripple Avenue, and she asked detailed, intelligent questions about the project, and I answered them. And it felt like the most natural thing in the world being known by someone who had decided to know you. He lost his license, she told me over dinner in August. Quietly, setting it down between the dishes like something fragile. When? I said. June. 2nd at-fault accident in 14 months. The doctor had been telling him for 2 years to get his vision checked. He kept saying he was fine. She paused. He's on the bus now. I looked at my plate. Which route? I asked. Josephine looked at me with an expression I had never quite seen on her face before. Something between sorrow and something else, not quite satisfaction, but the particular recognition of someone watching an equation balance itself. 12, she said. I set down my fork. I picked up my water glass. I took a slow, deliberate sip. Does he know? I asked. That it was redesigned, yes, he complained about it. She almost smiled. He said whoever redesigned it clearly didn't understand how real people move through a city. The Thai restaurant was warm and loud around us. Someone at the next table was laughing at something. Outside Broad Ripple Avenue moved in its Friday evening rhythm, headlights, foot traffic, the green flash of a walk signal at the corner. Josephine, I said, yes. Does he know who redesigned it? She looked at me evenly. No, she said. He doesn't. We sat with that for a moment. The groundbreaking ceremony is in November, I said. Public event, Mayor City Council Press. They're putting up banners along the Meridian Corridor. Project name lead engineer, credit the whole thing. Josephine picked up her chopsticks. I know, she said. I've already cleared my calendar. I flew into Indianapolis on a Friday evening in mid-November. The city was cold and gray in the way that Indianapolis is cold and gray in November, a specific flat, Midwestern coldness that settles into the streets and stays. I picked up the Mercedes from the rental coordination I had arranged. I had shipped it up from Charlotte rather than rent, because some things matter in ways that are difficult to explain and easy to understand, and drove to my hotel through streets I had known my whole life. I took the long way, down Kessler Boulevard, past the sandwich shop, a nail salon now, past the bus stops with their new heated shelters and real-time display boards, past the corner of Kessler and College Avenue, the intersection I had filled a notebook with data about at 16 years old, now running smoothly on the new signal timing system my team had designed. I sat at that intersection for a full light cycle, green to yellow to red and back to green. The cars moved, the buses moved. Everything moved the way it was supposed to move in the order it was supposed to move because someone had sat down and thought carefully about how systems work and what they need and what happens when you pay attention. The light turned green. I drove through. The ceremony was in the morning. The banners were already up along Meridian. I could see them as I headed north toward the hotel, white and blue snapping lightly in the November wind. My name was on them, Petra Callahan. Lead engineer, Indianapolis, transit expansion. I did not stop to look. I had a good night's sleep to get a presentation to review and a white Mercedes to park in front of a lectern at 8:45 in the morning. I had been waiting 13 years for tomorrow. I could wait one more night. The morning of the ceremony was cold and perfectly clear. One of those November days in Indianapolis where the sky is a hard, bright blue and the air has an edge to it that makes everything look more defined than usual. Sharper lines, longer shadows, the kind of light that doesn't soften anything. I was up at 5:30. I showered, dressed, made coffee from the hotel machine, and sat at the small desk by the window, reviewing my remarks for the third time. 4 minutes. That was my slot. The mayor would speak first, then the city council president, then the deputy director of public works, then me. 4 minutes to say what the Indianapolis transit expansion was, what it would do, and why it mattered. I had written and rewritten those 4 minutes 11 times over the past 3 weeks. I knew them the way you know something you've built yourself, not memorized exactly, but inhabited. I closed the folder at 6:45. I didn't need to review it again. I knew what I wanted to say. I got dressed in the dark navy suit I had bought specifically for this. I put on the small pearl earrings Josephine had given me when I graduated from Purdue. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror for a moment, not from vanity, but from the particular need to confirm that the person looking back was real, was exactly who she had decided to be. Then I went downstairs, got in the Mercedes, and drove to Meridian Street. The ceremony site was already active when I arrived at 7:50. A temporary stage had been built on the north side of the depot construction site, facing Meridian. Rows of chairs for invited guests, city officials, community representatives, project partners, press. Behind the chairs, a public viewing area cordoned off with low rope barriers already filling with residents from the surrounding neighborhoods. Camera crews from 2 local stations had set up to the left of the stage. A 3rd-grade class from a school on the near north side was arranged in 2 rows near the rope barrier, their teacher counting heads. The banners were everywhere. White and blue, the city sealed the project name. And on the largest one, suspended between 2 light poles directly facing the stage, Indianapolis, Transit Expansion, Phase 1. Lead engineer Petra Callahan. I parked the Mercedes directly in front of the stage in the reserved space Bernard had arranged. I stepped out. A project coordinator named Alicia came toward me immediately with a lanyard and a schedule and 3 questions that needed answers before 8:15. I answered all 3. I took the lanyard. I looked at the banner one more time. 13 years ago, I took the bus to a sandwich shop on Kessler Boulevard because no one would teach me to drive. This morning, my name was on a banner the size of a 2-car garage on the street I grew up beside. I went to find the mayor. What I didn't see because I was on stage, being introduced, adjusting the microphone, was what was happening at the bus stop on the corner of Meridian and 38th, roughly 140 feet north of the ceremony site. Josephine told me afterward. She had positioned herself near the rope barrier specifically because she knew the Route 12 bus ran northbound past that stop at 8:52, and she had done the math. Raymond and Sandra were on that bus. They were going to the pharmacy on Kessler. Sandra had mentioned it to Josephine in a phone call earlier that week, a routine errand, nothing significant. They had not known about the ceremony. Or rather, they had known a ceremony was happening, vaguely, the way you know about city events that have nothing to do with you. The street closure signs had been up for a week. Raymond had complained about them to Sandra because the bus route had been briefly altered during setup. The bus stopped at 38th, so the doors opened. Several passengers got off. Raymond and Sandra stayed on their stop, was further south. Then Sandra looked out the window. Josephine was watching from the rope barrier 30 feet away when it happened. She saw Sandra's hand reach over and grip Raymond's arm. She saw Raymond turn to look out the window. She saw his eyes move to the stage, to the banner, to the figure standing at the microphone in a dark navy suit. She saw his face when he read the name. He didn't get off the bus. The doors closed. The bus moved on. But Josephine said that in the 4 or 5 seconds between Sandra grabbing his arm and the doors closing, she watched Raymond Callahan's face do something she had never seen it do in 30 years of knowing him. It went completely still, not the controlled stillness of a man who has decided how things are, something different, the stillness of a man encountering something his framework cannot immediately process. A system error, she told me later. That's what it looked like a man running a calculation that wasn't returning the result he expected. I didn't know any of this while I was speaking. I stood at the microphone in my dark navy suit with the pearl earrings and the cold November light coming hard off the stage, and I gave my 4 minutes. I talked about the 120,000 daily riders the expanded network would serve. I talked about the neighborhoods on the south side that have been waiting 30 years for reliable transit access. I talked about what it means to design infrastructure not as an abstract, technical exercise, but as an act of civic care, a way of saying to the people of a city, your time matters, your movement matters, where you need to go matters. I did not talk about Kessler Boulevard. I did not talk about a notebook full of traffic delay data. I did not talk about a dining table or a pot roast or 11 words without a period. I didn't need to. It was all there anyway, underneath every word. The way foundations are underneath buildings, invisible structural holding everything up. When I finished, the applause started from the chairs and spread back through the public area. The 3rd grade class near the rope barrier clapped with the specific, enthusiastic chaos of 8-year-olds who have been told clapping is appropriate. One of the camera crews swung toward me. The mayor shook my hand. I stepped back from the microphone. Josephine found me during the reception afterward, between the coffee station and a table of project renderings. She came through the crowd with the focused efficiency of a former deputy director who has attended many civic events and knows how to move through them. She stopped in front of me and looked at my face for a moment. "He soared," she said. I had already understood that something had happened from the look on her face, from the particular quality of her stillness. "Tell me," I said. She told me. I listened to the whole thing without interrupting. The bus, the stop, Sandra's hand on Raymond's arm, his face in the window. When she finished, I was quiet for a moment. Around us, the reception continued. Voices, coffee, the crinkle of printed project materials. Someone laughing near the stage. The city moving forward the way cities do on the infrastructure that holds them up. "He didn't get off the bus," I said finally. "No," Josephine said. "Did he call you, Dick?" "Not yet." She paused. "He will." I looked out past the rope barriers to Meridian Street. The Route 12 bus shelter was visible from where I stood, the new one heated with the real-time display board showing the next arrival in 4 minutes. A woman with a stroller was already waiting. An older man in a heavy coat stood beside her, hand in his pockets, looking at the display. Not Raymond, just an ordinary man waiting for a bus on an ordinary November morning. But for a moment, I looked at him and felt the full weight of everything. 13 years, a dining table, a kitchen window, an empty parking lot in West Lafayette, a hotel room in Charlotte, a folder of project files, a banner on a light pole, all of it. I felt it completely. And then I let it settle into the place where things go when they are. Raymond called on a Monday. 2 days after the ceremony, I was back in Charlotte. It was early evening, the kind of quiet weeknight where the city outside sounds distant and manageable. I had just made dinner. I was standing at my kitchen counter with a bowl of pasta and my laptop open to the Phase 2 preliminary specs when my phone lit up with his name. I had been expecting it. Josephine had said he would call. She knew Raymond in the way that only someone who's watched a person from the outside for 30 years can know them. She could map his delays, his silences, the specific amount of time he needed to process something before he could make himself pick up the phone. 2 days. That was how long it had taken. I set down my fork. I answered, "Petra." His voice was different, not smaller exactly. Raymond's voice never went small, but the edges were different. The certainty that usually lived in every syllable, that low-frequency confidence of a man who has never seriously questioned his own judgment, it was still there, but it was working harder than usual, like a structure bearing more load than it was designed for. "Hi, Dad." A pause. 3 seconds. 4. "I saw the ceremony," he said. "On the news that evening, they showed a clip." "Okay," I said. "Sandra saw the banner on the bus before that." Another pause. "Your name was on it." "Yes." "Lead engineer." He said the words carefully, like he was reading them off something. "That was your project, the whole thing." "Yes," I said, "for the past 2 years." The silence that followed was the longest of the conversation. I counted it without meaning to. 7 seconds, 8, 9. "You were in Indianapolis," he said finally, "for site visits. You said you never said. You never asked what I was working on, Dad." I kept my voice even. Not cold, just level. The voice I used in stakeholder meetings when someone pushed back on the data. "Not once in 2 years, not once in 4 years, actually." He didn't respond to that directly. Raymond never responded to direct things directly. He moved around them the way he moved around everything that didn't fit his framework. "The garage," he said. "Hendrix, you knew when I called you." "I knew." "And you didn't tell me." I set down my pasta bowl and moved to the window. Charlotte at night, the lights of the south and the faint glow of the skyline. A city I had built a life in, deliberately one decision at a time. "Dad," I said, "what would you have wanted me to tell you?" Silence. That it was me. That the engineer you called faceless and out of touch, sitting in an office drawing lines on maps, didn't understand real people. That was your daughter. I paused. "Would that have changed anything? Would you have called Dale Hendricks and told him to drop the legal challenge? Would you have called me and said, 'Finally, after 29 years, Petra, I see what you've built'? Nothing." The line was open. I could hear him breathing. "You called me." I continued to complain about engineers who didn't understand human cost. "You called me to ask if I knew anyone hiring. You called me to tell me Mitchell had a new job." My voice was still steady. I had not raised it once. "In 2 years of phone calls about that project, you never once asked me what I did for a living." "Not really." Not with any intention of actually hearing the answer. A long pause. "I didn't know," he said quietly. "I know you didn't. That's what I'm telling you." Another silence, different from the others, heavier with something working underneath it. "The buses?" he said finally. His voice had shifted into something I'd never heard from Raymond Callahan. Not quite broken, but no longer fully assembled. "Route 12! That was yours too." "Yes. I ride that route every day now since the license." He stopped, started again. "I ride it every day, and He stopped again. I waited. "I complained about it." he said. To Josephine, I said whoever redesigned it didn't understand how people actually live. I know, I said. She told me. The sound he made was not quite a laugh and not quite anything else. A short, involuntary exhale, the sound of a man recognizing perhaps for the first time the specific geometry of what he had built and what it had cost him. Petra. Just my name, nothing attached to it. Dad. I didn't. He paused for a long time. I didn't think you'd. I know, I said, and I did know. That was the truest thing in the conversation. I knew exactly what he hadn't thought. And I understood with a clarity that had taken me 13 years to arrive at that his failure of imagination was not something I could fix. You didn't think I could? I know. That's not. It is, though, I said gently. It's okay. I'm not angry about it anymore, but I need you to understand that that's what it was. Not realism, not protecting me. You just didn't think I could. A very long pause. I'm sorry. 2 words, flat, undecorated. Raymond Callahan did not have a lot of practice with apology. I could hear that in the way he delivered it, the way a person sounds when they are using a muscle they have never really trained. It was imperfect. It was incomplete. It was, I believed, genuine. It was also not enough. Not to cover 29 years of kitchen windows and dining tables and pot roast, and 11 words without a period. But I had stopped needing it to be enough. Thank you, I said, and I meant that too in the specific and limited way that it was true. We met for coffee 4 days later. His suggestion? A diner on the north side of Indianapolis, neutral ground his choice, which I appreciated. I drove the Mercedes. I parked directly in front of the window where he was sitting in a spot that required parallel parking, which I executed without thinking about it. I watched his face through the glass when I stepped out of the car. He was looking. He saw the car first, then me. Something moved across his expression, recognition, and something I could not fully name. Not pride exactly, something more uncomfortable than pride. The look of a man confronting the distance between what he assumed and what was true. I went inside. He stood up when I came in. He had never stood up for me before, not once in my life that I could remember. I noticed it and filed it away without comment. We sat across from each other at a Formica table with 2 coffees and a menu neither of us looked at. He asked about the project. Real questions this time. How long the depot would take to build, what the new routes would cover, how the signal timing system worked. I answered all of them. He listened in the way he listened to things about engines attentively with the focused interest of someone who genuinely wants to understand how something functions. It was, I realized, the first real conversation we had ever had about my work. It lasted 40 minutes. He didn't apologize again. He did not make promises. He did not ask me to call more often or suggest that things would be different. Raymond Callahan was not built for grand gestures or tearful reconciliations. What he could offer was a diner table, real questions, the willingness to listen to answers he had spent years refusing to hear. I drove away afterward and sat at a red light on Meridian Street and thought about whether it was enough. It wasn't everything. I knew that. But it was something. And something from Raymond was more than I had ever been given before. The light turned green. I drove. It has been 3 months since that diner on the north side of Indianapolis. I am back in Charlotte. Phase 2 of the Indianapolis Transit expansion is underway, a Southern Corridor extension that will take another 18 months to complete. My name is still in the project documents. My team is still 9 people. Bernard promoted me to principal engineer in January, the youngest in the company's 23-year history. I found out on a Wednesday afternoon and called Josephine before I told anyone else. Of course, she said, as if it had never been in question. I am 29 years old. I live in a one-bedroom apartment in Plaza Midwood with good light and a kitchen I have slowly learned to cook real meals in. I drive the Mercedes to work every morning, and I park it in the same spot, and I have never once not for a single commute taken that for granted. Some mornings, I sit in the car for an extra minute before going inside, not thinking about anything in particular, just sitting with it, the wheel, the seat, the simple fact of having gotten myself here. No one taught me. That's the part that still lands differently than everything else. Raymond spent 30 years working on other people's cars, and he never once put me in the driver's seat. And I learned anyway. In shopping center parking lots in the rain, with Josephine coaching me through a phone speaker propped on the dashboard. I learned anyway. That is the sentence I come back to most often when I think about my life. I learned anyway. Raymond and I talk on the phone about once a month now. The conversations are not long. They are not warm in the way that people mean when they use that word about family, the ease and familiarity of people who have always known how to be with each other. We don't have that. We are building something different, slower, out of different materials. Real questions, honest answers, the occasional silence that neither of us rushes to fill. He asks about the project. I tell him, he listens. Last month, he told me that the new Route 12 shelter on Meridian and 38th had a heater that actually worked and that it made the wait significantly more bearable in January. He said it matter-of-factly without connecting it to me, without acknowledging the design decision behind it. But he said it. And I think for Raymond, that was its own kind of acknowledgement. I chose to hear it that way. Maybe that's too generous. Maybe it's exactly generous enough. Sandra calls more often than Raymond. She has always been better on the phone, warmer, more willing to reach. She asks about my apartment, my friends, whether I'm eating properly. She sent me a card on my last birthday with a $20 bill folded inside it, which made me laugh for reasons she would not entirely understand. I called to thank her, and we talked for 40 minutes about nothing important, and it was genuinely one of the nicest phone calls I have had in recent memory. I love my mother. I have made my peace with who she is and what she was able to give me and what she wasn't. That peace took years, and it cost something to arrive at, and I don't pretend it came for free. But it's real. It holds. Mitchell sent me a message in December. Hey, sis, heard about your project. Big deal. Hey, do you know anyone hiring in Charlotte? Thinking about a change? I read it twice. Then I put my phone face down on the counter and made coffee and stood at my kitchen window for a few minutes looking at the Charlotte morning. Then I picked up my phone and typed, "Congrats on thinking about a change. I don't have any connections in your field right now. Good luck." I pressed send. Then I put my phone in my bag and went to work. It was, I want to be clear, one of the easier decisions I have made in recent years. Josephine came to Charlotte in February. I picked her up from the airport in the Mercedes. She got in the passenger seat, buckled her seatbelt, looked around the interior with the appraising eye of a woman who spent 26 years assessing infrastructure and said, "Nice car." "Thank you," I said. I had a good teacher. She laughed. Real laughter, the deep kind, the kind that takes up room. We drove to my apartment. I cooked dinner pasta, the one thing I have genuinely mastered. And we ate at my small dining table with the window open to the February evening and talked for 3 hours about the Phase 2 corridor design, about a bridge retrofit project she had consulted on in retirement, about a book she was reading, about nothing and everything in the easy, unhurried way of two people who have run out of things to prove to each other. At some point, she looked around my apartment, the framed project maps on the wall, the engineering textbooks on the shelf, the good coffee maker on the counter, the window with the Charlotte skyline faint in the distance, and she said quietly, almost to herself, "This is what it looks like." "What?" I asked. "When someone builds their own life from scratch." She looked at me. From the actual scratch. No runway, no inheritance, no one handing you the keys. She paused. "This is what it looks like." I didn't say anything for a moment. "You handed me the keys," I said, finally, in a parking lot in West Lafayette. She smiled. "I handed you 40 minutes in a parking lot. You did everything else." I think about Raymond sometimes when I am driving. Not with anger, that particular weight lifted somewhere between the diner and the drive, home somewhere on Meridian Street at a green light in November. What I feel now is something harder to name. Not forgiveness exactly, not the dramatic, declarative kind. More like the quiet recognition that a person can be deeply wrong about something for their entire life and still be underneath the wrongness, a person, incomplete, capable of only so much, doing the best they could with a framework that was always too small for the people inside it. Raymond's framework was too small for me. That is simply true. I spent 29 years trying to fit inside it, and I couldn't. Not because I was too much, but because I was exactly right, and the frame was the problem. I outgrew it, and then I drove away. What I built after that, the degree, the work, the apartment, the car, the team of 9 people, the routes that move 120,000 people through a city every day, none of it came from his belief in me. It came from mine. That is the thing I want to say. If there is one thing, you do not need the person who doubted you to come around in order to become who you are going to be. Raymond calling me after the ceremony did not make me a principal engineer. Raymond sitting across the diner table and asking real questions did not design the depot, or the routes, or the signal infrastructure, or the heated shelter on Meridian and 38th. I did that. With or without him, I did that. And every morning when I get in my car and pull out of that parking spot and drive myself to work myself, no one else exactly where I decide to go, I know it completely. I learned anyway. That was always going to be enough. You don't need their permission to go where you're going. You never did. The road was always yours. You just had to decide to get behind the wheel. Thank you so much for staying with me until the end. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe. Have you ever had to build something entirely on your own without anyone believing you could? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if you want more stories like this, check out the video in the description. Until next time, take care of yourself. You deserve it.